I'm Erin Blake, 31 years old, and 3 days before Thanksgiving, my mother looked me in the eye and said, "This place isn't for losers." She said it the way someone might comment on the weather firm Detached, like the matter had already been settled. My younger sister Hannah was bringing her boyfriend home for the holiday, and apparently the grease under my nails from working diesel rigs didn't fit the picture I'd already bought. A scarf for Mom, picked out a watch for Dad, and cleared my work schedule just to be there. But none of that mattered. I told her I understood. And 5 days later, they showed up at my house, faces pale, holding a tin of muffins. But by then, it was already too late. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong in your own family. I grew up just outside of Dayton, Ohio. We didn't have much, but the house was always tidy, folded towels, swept floors, matching silverware for Sunday dinners. My dad, Gerald, worked for the city in infrastructure planning. Quiet, measured, never raised his voice. My mom, Marilyn, ran the house like a showroom, every curtain steamed, every holiday meal picture perfect. And Hannah, she was their pride. Smiled in every school photo, captain of the dance team, always seemed to glide through life like she'd been rehearsing it. I was different, loud in the wrong moments, stubborn where I should have softened. I was the one who rebuilt my first alternator at 15, flashlight in my mouth elbow deep under an old Ford. By the time I was 20, I had my diesel tech certification and a full-time job working freight trucks down at a shop near I-75. Didn't matter to them. Mom once asked if I was sure I didn't want to reconsider something more presentable. She used that word a lot, presentable. Hannah went off to college for marketing and public speaking, ended up on a local news channel in Columbus, then came home when that fizzled out. Still, to my parents, she was a star. They passed around her Facebook photos in the family group chat, all hearts and smiley faces. No one ever asked how many trucks I'd overhauled that month. No one came to see the shop I managed or the team I trained, but I still showed up. Every Mother's Day with a bouquet, every 4th of July with grilled corn and cold beer. I fixed Dad's snowblower, replaced their gutters, wired Hannah a few $100 when her apartment pipes burst. No one asked. I just did it. That's what family does, right? So when Mom called that Monday night before Thanksgiving and told me Hannah wanted everything to go just right, I already knew what that meant. She didn't say it directly, she never had to. But I knew my ponytail, steel-toe boots, and work truck weren't part of the vision. Hannah's boyfriend had gone to some big-name school and worked in tech finance, and I guess they didn't want him shaking hands with the woman who fixed his delivery fleet. I stood in the hallway of my little house, boots half off, still wearing the same hoodie I'd had on since dawn. I thought about the scarf I'd wrapped for Mom still in a gift bag by the kitchen table. Thought about the casserole I wasn't going to bring. And I said what I'd trained myself to say when I knew no one was going to change their minds. I understand, but by the end of that week, they were the ones on my porch, not for dinner, not for family, but because they had just found out who Hannah's boyfriend really was. I spent that Thanksgiving morning in silence, the kind that settles heavy like snow on an empty road. No smell of roasted turkey, no football on the TV. Just the hum of the fridge and the faint creak of the old floorboards as I moved around my kitchen, not sure what to do with myself. I made 2 eggs and toast, not because I was hungry, but because it gave my hands something to do. The white gift bag with Mom's scarf still sat untouched on the table. I left it there. Same with the watch I'd picked out for Dad, tucked inside its box, engraved with a line he once said while teaching me to change brake pads in our garage. "Fix everything you can," it read. I hadn't wrapped it yet. Around noon, I grabbed my toolbox and drove across town. The roads were mostly clear except for the dusting of snow from the night before. I stopped at Mrs. Halpern's place, a retired school teacher I'd helped now and then with odd jobs. A few days earlier, she'd left me a voicemail about her garage door opener being jammed again. I figured I'd rather be under a garage ceiling than under my own thoughts. She answered the door in a thick sweater, eyes bright behind her glasses. On Thanksgiving, she asked, surprised but smiling. I shrugged. Better than sitting around doing nothing. She didn't press, just stepped aside and said coffee's on the table. The fix took less than an hour. I stayed a little longer, helped her bring in firewood, changed out a smoke detector battery, and listened while she talked about her late husband and how he used to carve the turkey like he was hosting a cooking show. Before I left, she handed me a slice of pie wrapped in foil. "In case you forget how home's supposed to taste," she said. Driving back, I passed my parents' street. Their house was lit up like it always was this time of year, warm lights glowing through the windows, silhouettes moving inside. Someone lifted a wine glass. Someone else laughed. I didn't slow down. Back home, I lit the stove and sat in the chair near the window, the one that faced the backyard. I stared at the pie for a while, then finally took a bite. It wasn't the one I grew up with. No whipped cream, no extra cinnamon. But it was warm, and it was enough. The next few days passed in quiet stretches. I kept to my usual routine, early mornings at the shop, evenings with a podcast or a book. No calls from Mom, no messages from Hannah, just the sound of Ratchet's motors and the occasional snowplow rolling by after dark. On Sunday, I was halfway under a flatbed grease streaked up my arm when I heard a car pull up. Then doors closing. I rolled out from beneath the truck and stepped outside, wiping my hands on a rag. My parents were standing in the driveway. Hannah was with them. Dad wore his best coat, the one he only brought out for holidays and church. Mom held a tin of cranberry muffins. Hannah stood slightly apart, arms crossed, expression sharp. Erin Mom called out, voice high and careful. "We thought we'd stop by, just to check in on you." I leaned against the garage door frame. "Check in." After telling me Thanksgiving wasn't for losers. Hannah stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "You should have told me," she snapped. "Told you what that Evan used to work for you." I blinked. "Evan? Your boyfriend?" She nodded, jaw tight. "I didn't realize until Friday. He made a joke about my chipped nail polish and said I wouldn't last 10 minutes working with you. Then he told me everything. I didn't say anything, just waited." She kept going. "He told us you trained him, that you gave him his first real chance at the shop, that you stopped your boss from firing him after he messed up that axle." She looked over at our parents, then back at me. "He said he wouldn't even have a career if it weren't for you." Mom's face was pale now. Dad shifted awkwardly beside her. And then Hannah said, voice rising, "He told us about your investments, about how you taught him the difference between trading and building real wealth, said you showed him your spreadsheets, told him about the portfolio, about the $1 million. I didn't confirm or deny. Just let it sit there like fog hanging over cold concrete." Mom stepped forward. "We had no idea, honey." I looked at her. "Would it have mattered if you did?" She didn't answer. Dad cleared his throat. "It's not about the money, Erin." I laughed once. "Isn't it?" Hannah's expression shifted. Not regret, but something closer to embarrassment. "You made me look ridiculous in front of him." I met her eyes. "I didn't make you do anything. You decided who I was before you even let me in the room." There was a pause, long and brittle. Mom glanced at the tin in her hands. "We came to apologize and to talk. Evan's starting something, a business. Auto parts distribution, I think. He said you two should meet again. Maybe work together. Combine your skills." And there it was. The real reason. I stepped back toward the garage. "You came to apologize," I said. "But you brought a business pitch. It's called building something," Hannah said sharply. "You should understand that." "I do," I replied. "That's why I built it without you." Then I turned and went back inside, leaving them standing there in the cold. That night I barely slept. Not because I was angry, but because the conversation kept replaying in my mind. Every word, every pause. I sat at the table, the cranberry muffins untouched, the wrapped scarf still in its bag. Outside, frost crept up the windows. Inside, the silence settled in again. The next morning, my phone rang around 10. It was Hannah. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Look," she said as soon as I picked up. "Yesterday got messy, but I want to start over. I didn't say anything. I talked to Evan. He still thinks the business could work, but only with you involved. Because of the money," I said. "Because of your experience," she corrected. "And yeah, the capital helps. But he respects you. He really does. He sees what I didn't." She paused. "I know we've never been close. But maybe this is a chance to change that. To build something, together, as sisters." I stood by the window watching the snow fall across the yard. I didn't respond right away. I was still thinking about the way she said now. As if everything had changed. As if it took a bank statement to prove I was worth her time. "What do you think I do every day, Hannah?" She hesitated. "You fix trucks. I run diagnostics on rigs that weigh more than school buses. I manage a crew of 7. I still crawl under engines myself when something doesn't sound right. I've built something. Not just a portfolio. A business. A home." She was quiet. "That's why this matters," she said finally. "Because you're the kind of person who makes things work." I kept my eyes on the yard. If I'd said yes before you knew about Evan, before the money, would I have been invited to Thanksgiving? She didn't speak. "No," she said softly. I was embarrassed. And now, again, nothing. "Let me be clear," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not buying my way into belonging. If we're going to build anything, it doesn't start with a deal." "Erin," she said quickly, "don't throw this away over pride. This isn't pride," I said. "It's boundaries." Then I ended the call. Outside, the wind had picked up. The trees along the fence swayed gently in the cold. Inside, I stood in the quiet and let it settle. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even disappointed. I was just done waiting. And in that stillness, something was starting to shift. The day after I hung up on Hannah, the house stayed quiet. The kind of quiet that feels more like an answer than a question. I moved through the routine, checked in at the shop, picked up a part from the salvage yard, stopped for groceries, but every motion felt distant, like I was watching myself from somewhere else. Around 3 in the afternoon, I came back to find my parents' car already parked in front of the house. Same spot as last time. The snow hadn't melted from their last visit. I sat in the truck for a moment before stepping out. The engine ticked as it cooled. I could hear the crunch of their footsteps on the driveway before they knocked. I opened the door, wiping my hands on a towel. Mom was bundled in her red coat again, eyes searching my face. Dad stood behind her, his jaw tight, shoulders squared like he was bracing for impact. "Hi, sweetheart," Mom said gently. "Can we come in?" I stepped aside and let them in. Not because I was ready to hear them out, but because I was ready to be clear. We sat in the living room, each of us on our own island. The scarf I'd bought for her was still on the table, untouched in its white bag. Her eyes caught it, then drifted away. "I want to start over," she said. "We made a mistake, a big one." I nodded once. "Yeah, you did." Dad cleared his throat. "We were wrong to leave you out. It wasn't right. We didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to hurt me?" I asked, looking at him. "You told me Thanksgiving wasn't for losers. You didn't think I'd push back." They didn't respond. The silence didn't feel awkward. It felt overdue. "I'm not here to argue," I said, "and I'm not here to be convinced." Mom reached for her coat button, then let her hand fall. "We're not here about money," she said. "I promise." "Then why now?" I asked. "Why only after you found out what I've built?" Dad shifted forward, elbows on his knees. "We didn't know. And if Evan never said a word, I asked, "Would you be sitting here?" They didn't answer. I leaned forward, voice steady. "I'm not ashamed of my work. I've never been. The only thing I regret is how long I let your silence shrink me." Mom's eyes filled, but she didn't say anything. "We were trying to make things easier for Hannah," she whispered, "to protect her moment. And you erased mine," I said. "I've spent years showing up, fixing things, letting your approval be a moving target. This is where that ends." They both stilled. "I'm not cutting you off," I added, "but I'm done begging to be included. I'm done performing for a place I should have had from the start." Dad sat back, exhaling slowly. "So what happens now?" I stood and walked to the front door, opened it. "What happens now," I said, "is you decide whether you can love me for who I am, not who you wished I'd been. But you do that from the other side of this door." Mom stood but didn't move. Her mouth opened like she wanted to say something, but she didn't find the words. I didn't fill the silence for her. Eventually they stepped out. I closed the door behind them, not hard, just firm, just enough. The days that followed came and went without much notice. No more visits, no messages. A few texts that didn't say much. One birthday card in January with just their names. Hannah called once a month after everything. She said Evan had backed out of the business idea, said she wasn't sure what to do next. I told her I hoped she'd figure it out, and I meant it. But I didn't invite her back in. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was just finished waiting. In the months that followed, something else began to happen. Small things at first. An email from a woman who said she'd gone to the same trade school and heard I managed my own team. She asked how I'd done it. Then another message, this time from someone who'd seen a photo from one of our shop builds and wanted to know how I got into investing. Word started to spread. The community center called and asked if I'd be willing to speak at one of their workshops. Not on mechanics on money, budgeting long-term savings planning. I said yes. I stood in front of 12 folding chairs in a windowless room on a Tuesday night, hands still nicked from the shop, and told them the truth. That I started with $700 and a library card. That I'd read more books than I could count, worked more hours than I could explain, and built everything I had piece by piece the same way I'd rebuild an engine. After the session, a girl, maybe 20, 21, handed me a note she'd folded 3 times. I opened it in the parking lot. It said, "Thank you for showing me that worth isn't something you prove. It's something you carry." I sat in my truck for a long time with that note in my lap, the engine off the heater ticking softly. Later that week, I stood in the backyard behind my house. The apple trees I'd planted 2 summers ago were just starting to bud again. It wasn't a big yard, nothing fancy, but it was mine, a quiet patch of earth where things could grow. Jada pulled up in her Jeep around sunset, 2 coffees in a drink tray and a box of donuts balanced on the passenger seat. "You working again?" she asked, handing me a cup. "Always," I said, brushing sawdust off my sleeves. We sat on the porch steps as the sun dipped behind the rooftops. "You ever think about going back?" she asked gently. I didn't have to ask what she meant. "No," I said. "Not unless they can see me without the $1 million. She nodded. "They probably won't." "I know." I looked at her, this person who never once treated me like I had to explain myself, who never saw dirt under my nails as something to apologize for. "You know what," I said, "I finally feel like I'm not trying to fix the wrong engine anymore." Jada smiled and tossed me a donut hole. That's the most mechanic way I've ever heard someone say, "I found peace." She wasn't wrong. I wasn't fixing them anymore. I was building me. Spring came in slow this year, the kind of season that tiptoes in instead of bursting through. Most mornings I'd catch sight of new buds on the apple trees or hear the faint scratch of cardinals building nests outside the shop window. The cold didn't leave all at once, but it softened around the edges. One Tuesday in April, I was loading spare filters into the storage cabinet when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hi, Erin." the voice said, careful and clear. Yes. This is Lisa Barnes. I'm with the local trade school, Dayton Regional Tech. I run the Women's Mentorship Program. I was wondering if you'd ever considered speaking to our diesel tech students. I stood still for a second. The only sound in the background was the slow hiss of the shop's space heater. I heard from one of our grads that you've built something really steady both in work and in finance, she continued. The girls here, they don't get to see a lot of examples like that, especially not from someone who looks like them. I said yes, not because I felt like I had something big to say, but because the invitation felt different. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about image. It was about the work. 2 weeks later, I walked into a small classroom that smelled faintly of coffee and engine grease. 12 folding chairs lined up in 2 rows. A whiteboard behind me wiped clean. Most of the girls wore thick work jackets and steel-toed boots. Their faces were young, but their eyes already held that look, half grit, half caution. I told them how I'd started at a depot with second-hand tools and a 2-bedroom rental that shook when it rained. How I read every finance book the public library had. How I made more mistakes than I could count, but kept showing up. I told them about working 12-hour days and investing $75 a month when I could barely cover groceries. They didn't say much at first, just nodded, took notes. A few lingered afterward asking if I'd be willing to review their resumes or recommend a starter fund. I said I would. That night, I came home to find a card slipped under my screen door. No envelope. Just folded cardstock with clean handwriting. Thank you, it read, for showing us that quiet doesn't mean small. I left it on the fridge and stood there for a while with the porch light still on. A few days later, Jada and I drove out to a salvage auction. Nothing fancy, just a weekend trip to scout a retired utility truck we'd heard was up for grabs. On the way back, she asked if I'd thought any more about going public with my numbers. You don't have to tell everyone, she said, but folks should know what's possible. I've never needed to, I said. And the second I do, people stop seeing me. They start seeing dollar signs. She nodded, then reached for her coffee. Still, might be worth saying, on your own terms. I didn't answer, but the idea stuck with me. That night I looked over my old spreadsheets. I saw the first tiny deposits, the missed weeks, the rebound. I saw the line inch upward, slow and steady, year after year. The next morning, I emailed Lisa and asked if I could come back, not to speak, but to help. Maybe start a workshop on budgeting for tradespeople, maybe volunteer in the evenings. She replied in less than an hour, "We'd love to have you." That Saturday, I was restocking shelves at the garage when a familiar car pulled up outside. Not my parents', not Hannah's, but someone I hadn't expected. It was Evan. He stepped out slowly, hands shoved into the pockets of a clean windbreaker. His hair was shorter than before, but otherwise he looked the same. "Didn't think I'd see you here," I said as he approached. "Didn't think you'd answer if I called," he replied. I didn't argue. He glanced toward the open bay. "I wanted to say thank you for what you did for me back at Franklin Freight. No one else would have taken the time." I wiped my hands on a towel and leaned against the wall. "You worked hard. You just needed someone to show you where to aim." He nodded, quiet. "I told Hannah I wasn't going forward with the startup," he said after a pause. "It didn't feel right trying to build something off someone else's effort, especially when that someone wasn't even invited to the table." I didn't answer right away, just watched a bird pick at the edge of a puddle in the lot. "She's not doing great," he added. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I just thought you should know." I nodded once. "Thanks." He offered a small wave, then turned to go. That night, I sat on the porch again this time with an old notebook open in my lap. Inside were hand-scribbled goals from years ago. Most of them had already been crossed off. Buy a home, pay off debt, run my own team, stay quiet, stay steady. But I hadn't written anything new in a while. I picked up the pen and wrote one more, Make space for those who never got one. The house was quiet, same as always, but something in me had changed. Not loud, not sudden, just sure. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't proving anymore. I was beginning. It was a Thursday evening when the next message came through. This time it wasn't Evan, it was Hannah. I saw her name flash across the screen while I was standing at the back of the shop organizing belts and filters into bins. I let it ring once, twice. Then I picked up. "Hey," she said. Her voice was quieter than usual, like she didn't know where to start. "I heard Evan stopped by," she said after a pause. "He did." Another pause. "I didn't know he planned to do that," she added. "But I'm glad he did. I think I've been holding a lot of things the wrong way." I didn't speak. I let her continue. "I know we've never had the kind of relationship people write holiday cards about, and maybe that's my fault, or Mom and Dad's, or just the way things turned out." She stopped to take a breath. "But I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how you've built something real, something solid, and I guess I'd like to know more about that, about you." I leaned back against the wall, staring at the rows of tools hanging above the workbench. "What changed?" I asked. She was quiet again. Then she said, "I started looking through some of Evan's old notes, stuff he saved from your trainings, tips on managing time, saving receipts, ordering parts, even his budget plan. I never knew he kept it all." Her voice softened. "I thought I had you figured out, Erin. Turns out I didn't know the half of it." The conversation hung there for a moment. "I'm not asking for anything," she added quickly. "Not money, not favors, just a conversation." I agreed to meet her the following week. Neutral ground, small coffee shop halfway between her place and mine. I picked a weekday morning hoping it'd be quieter. The place was nearly empty when I got there. Just a couple folks working on laptops and the sound of the espresso machine in the background. Hannah arrived 5 minutes late wearing a heavy coat and no makeup. That was new. We ordered, sat by the window, and for the first few minutes just stirred cream into our cups. Then she spoke. "I think I always measured you against the wrong scale." I looked at her. "I didn't mean to," she said. "It's just, growing up, everything felt like it had to be polished, controlled. You were different, loud, messy, confident when I wasn't." I waited. "Mom and Dad wanted a certain picture," she continued, "and I was better at posing for it." We sat there quietly for a few moments. Cars passed outside their tires, brushing against wet pavement. "I came to say, I'm sorry," she said. "Not because of what you have, but because of how I treated you before I knew." I nodded. "Thank you for saying that." She looked up. "I don't know how to fix it." I sipped my coffee. "Starts by not pretending it didn't happen." She folded her hands around her cup. "Would you consider, maybe not now, but eventually, helping me figure out how to build something too?" I gave a small nod. "If you're serious about it, it's not quick, it's not glamorous, but it's worth doing." Her shoulders relaxed a little. "I think I am." That was all we said about it that day. No talk of partnerships, no sudden promises, just a beginning slow and uncertain. The following week, I sent her a list of books. Nothing fancy, just the same titles I'd checked out years ago. I told her to start there. A few days after that, she forwarded me her budget. Basic spreadsheet, rough around the edges, but it was hers. That weekend, she stopped by the shop, asked if she could shadow for a day just to understand the pace. I let her sweep the back bay and organize the small parts drawers. When we took a break, she asked what I looked for when hiring. I gave her honest answers. Not once did she bring up the business idea. And I didn't ask if our parents knew she was there. The next week, she came back, helped me organize a pile of brake drums we'd just received. At one point, she looked at me and said, "I used to think this work was beneath you. Now I can't believe how much it demands." I didn't respond. I just handed her a pair of gloves and motioned toward the last row. That evening, as she was leaving, she paused at the door. "I don't want anything from you, Erin," she said. "I just want to know you." Then she left. That night, I pulled out an old box from the back of the closet. Inside were a few photos, a couple letters from old coworkers, and a small leather notebook I hadn't opened in years. On the inside cover, I'd written one sentence when I first started at the depot: "Be the person you needed when you started." I stared at it for a long while. Then I grabbed a pen and added something underneath. "And don't be afraid to let others grow too." Outside, the wind had picked up. A few branches knocked against the side of the house. Inside, things were shifting again, not loudly, not suddenly, just enough to notice. The first real shift came in early May. I had just wrapped up a service on a refrigerated trailer, arms still coated with road dust, when I saw the missed call from my mother. No voicemail, no follow-up text, just a single call from the number I hadn't heard from in over 2 months. I didn't call back. 2 days later, they showed up at the shop. I saw the car before I heard it, the same tan sedan Dad had driven since I was in high school, pulling into the gravel lot behind the garage. They sat inside for a moment, engine running, before the doors opened. Mom stepped out first. Neat blouse, light jacket hair pinned back. Dad followed a little slower, holding a manila envelope in one hand and what looked like a small stack of folded paperwork in the other. I stayed where I was wiping my hands with a rag near the loading bay. "Erin." Mom called out, voice tight with forced warmth. "Do you have a minute?" I didn't answer right away, just nodded once and waited. They walked over slowly, both stopping a few feet from me. Dad glanced around the shop at the shelving I'd welded myself at the job board with color-coded tags at the guys still working under the next bay. He cleared his throat. "We wanted to talk to you. In person." I folded the rag once more and set it aside. "Go ahead." Mom glanced at him, then stepped forward. "We've been speaking with someone," she said. "A friend of ours from the city. He's in estate planning." I didn't move. "We're restructuring a few things," she continued. "Long-term documents, wills, that kind of thing." Dad handed me the envelope. Inside was a draft packet, revocable trust terms, listed beneficiaries, notarized letters. My name was there, so was Hannah's. "You weren't on it before," he said. We hadn't updated anything in a while. I looked at them both, then at the papers again. "This is what you came here for?" I asked. Mom took a breath. "It's part of it. We also wanted to say, we see now how wrong we were. You shouldn't have been excluded, and you shouldn't have been treated like you had less value." They waited. I set the packet down on the workbench gently. "So what changed?" Neither of them answered. Then Dad said, "We learned more about what you've done, what you've built." I nodded once. Mom stepped in again. "We want to make things right." A long silence followed. Then I asked, what would have happened if Evan never said anything, if Hannah never found out? She didn't answer. "Would you be standing here now?" Dad looked away. I let the moment stretch. Then I said, "You didn't come here to make things right. You came here to make things even." They both flinched at that, just barely. "I'm not looking for a payout," I continued. "Not a correction, not a name on a form. What I needed was a family that didn't wait for a spreadsheet to show them who I was." Mom blinked quickly, but her voice stayed steady. "We know that now, and we're sorry." I nodded. "I accept the apology," I said. "But it doesn't mean we're going back to before." Dad opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "I've spent too long shrinking to fit into a version of this family that didn't have room for me." They stood still for a moment, unsure of where to go next. Finally, Mom asked, "What do we do now?" I thought for a moment. "You do your part," I said. "You listen, you show up, and you stop trying to fix what you chose to ignore for years." Then I picked up the envelope, walked over to the office, and set it inside without another word. They left without asking for a hug. That night I stayed late at the garage, not working, just sitting, watching the shop go quiet after the last truck rolled out. There was peace in the silence. Not the kind that comes from resolution, the kind that comes from finally standing still in your own truth. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next word from anyone else. I was writing my own. The following week, I got a message from Lisa over at the trade school. One of the students I'd worked with, Tanya, had just landed an internship at a commercial fleet shop. She'd listed me as a reference, and they'd called to ask about her. Lisa said she wanted me to know that whatever I was doing was working. I sat in my truck for a minute after reading that. It was early, barely past 7. The sky was still gray, and the frost hadn't burned off the windshield yet. I didn't move right away, just listened to the quiet tick of the engine, letting it settle in. Later that afternoon, I walked into the community garage, same one where I'd started leading the weekend workshops. There were already 3 people waiting, 2 women in coveralls, and a teenage girl holding a spiral notebook. We went over basic maintenance budgeting, estimating repair costs, reading parts invoices without getting taken for a ride. Afterwards, one of them lingered by the door. She handed me a folded slip of paper. It said, "Thanks for making this feel possible." That night, I lit a fire in the stove and sat at the table with a bowl of soup, that note still sitting beside me. Outside, the wind had picked up again. Rain on the windows, faint but steady. My phone buzzed once around 8. Hannah. This time it was just a text. No business pitch. Just wanted to say I read one of the books you sent. I'm starting to get it. I replied, "That's good. Keep going." She didn't ask for anything more, and I didn't offer. That weekend I stopped by Jada's place. She was organizing a fundraiser for a local shelter that needed new tires for their transport van. I asked how short they were. She gave me a number. I matched it on the spot. No name on it, I told her. "Just let them know that they'll be rolling safe by Monday." Jada grinned. "You're starting to sound like someone who knows they belong exactly where they are." I smiled and didn't answer. The following Monday, I was locking up the shop when I noticed an envelope tucked between the glass and the door frame. No name on the outside. Inside was a handwritten note in my mother's handwriting. It said, "This isn't about money. I'm proud of what you've built. I'm still learning how to show it. Love, Mom." No signature, no return address. But I recognized the writing, the way she curled her lowercase f's, the shape of her M. I didn't respond, not right away. That Friday, I drove past their house on the way to a client call-out. Their front lights were on, porch still neat, garden still trimmed the way it always had been. I didn't stop, just passed by slow enough to notice, fast enough not to get caught looking. Back at home that night, I opened the windows for the first time all season. Let the spring air in. The kitchen still smelled like grease and wood smoke. I didn't mind. I sat on the porch with a thermos and watched the sun drop below the line of trees. That's when I saw it. Not far from the mailbox, someone had planted lilies. Fresh, still holding their color, right where the snow usually drifted heavy in winter. I didn't ask who left them. I didn't need to. The next morning, Hannah showed up at the shop again. Same work boots as last time, same folded sleeves. She didn't say much, just helped me unload a parts shipment, checked the incoming inventory, asked a few questions about drive shaft torque. When we broke for lunch, she looked over at me. "I know I've said this before, but I mean it differently now," she said. "Thank you." I nodded. "I'm not done learning," she added, "but I'm here." I passed her the socket wrench I'd been holding. "Then let's keep going." That afternoon she stayed late, helped clean up the bays. took home a copy of the repair schedule so she could study over the weekend. I didn't know what would come next with her, or with my parents, but something had shifted. Not a full circle, not a clean rewrite, just a step forward. And sometimes that's enough. The last real snow melted by mid-April. By May, the apple trees in my yard were full of pale blossoms, and I'd started leaving the shop doors open in the afternoon just to let the breeze in. The days stretched longer, but felt quieter somehow, like something had finally settled after years of running uphill. Hannah still came by once a week, sometimes twice. She didn't always stay long, and she didn't push for more than what I was willing to give. She asked questions about the business, how I tracked parts, how I kept the books, what I looked for when hiring. And when she didn't know something, she just said so. No spin, no show. One afternoon she brought lunch. Sandwiches from a place I used to go with Dad when I was little. We sat in the back of the garage, leaning against the wall, tools quiet for once. "You know," she said, unwrapping her sandwich, "I used to think power looked like rooms full of people clapping for you." I didn't say anything, just waited. But lately I've been watching you, the way you move through your day, how people ask you things, how you carry things. And I think maybe power looks more like this, like knowing what's yours and not needing to ask permission for it. I nodded. It takes time to get there. She smiled, soft and genuine. I'm starting. The next morning I found a package on my porch. Small box, no return address. Inside was the scarf I'd bought Mom last Thanksgiving, the one I'd left in its bag on the kitchen table, folded neatly untouched, but resting on a handwritten note. I wasn't ready to wear this before. I am now. Thank you. Mom. I sat with that for a while. No rush to respond. Just held the box in my lap and let the moment be what it was. There were still things unsaid between us, still gaps, still weight, but I no longer felt like I had to carry it all, and that in itself was enough. Later that week, the community garage asked if I'd consider mentoring 2 students over the summer. I said yes. Their names were Karina and Shay, both 19, both just starting out. On their first day, I handed each of them a set of tools and a clean shop towel, then told them the same thing I'd once needed to hear. You don't have to prove anything here. You just have to show up. The rest comes with time. That night after they left, I walked out to the backyard. The trees were taller than they'd been last year, a few small apples already clinging to the branches. I sat on the porch steps sipping tea, watching the sun drop below the roof line of the neighbor's house. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next test or the next invitation. I wasn't chasing approval or bracing for silence. I had my own rhythm now, my own space, my own name said with quiet certainty, and I realized something. Being shut out of someone else's table didn't mean you were without one. Sometimes it just meant you were meant to build your own board by board, year by year, surrounded by the kind of people who saw you before the accolades, who stayed through the rebuilding, who never once asked you to be anything but real. We don't always get to choose where we begin, but we do get to decide what we grow. Thanks for listening to my story. If it reminded you of someone you've become or someone you've finally let go of, feel free to share in the comments. And if you're still building your own place in the world, take your time. You're not behind, you're just becoming.